How do you think companies can strike the balance between big, lofty, ambitious goals and setting realistic expectations and actionable next steps that the executors can actually accomplish?
I'm a general believer that the most important thing is it starts with alignment at the executive level. That maybe seems like off base here, but like if you can't get alignment and there's not trust amongst that team to push on each other to really challenge, is this realistic enough? Do we have what we need to like accomplish this? Do we have the right people? Do we have the right resourcing? If in that room when you're actually planning, you can't have those honest conversations, then you're going to feel it with the rest of the team. It will trickle down. It always starts with the executive team, and what happens on execution is the translation of what happens in that room on planning and the leader's ability to translate that to their respective departments.
This episode of Inside the Process is powered by Trainual, the one app that organizes who does what and how. Check it out at trainual.com.
Welcome to this very special live recording of Inside the Process, the podcast where we dig into all of your process secrets and best practices to help you continuously improve and level up the work you're doing. I'm Mallory, a 10-year systems and ops veteran turned marketer, and I'm here with Hayfa Aboukair. Welcome, Hayfa.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So we are huge fans of you here at Trainual, and we just did annual planning with you, and you are such a wealth of knowledge when it comes to annual planning, which is obviously why we brought you here today. But I actually think you have a beautiful story of purpose and resilience, and I just love who you are as a person. So I'm hoping you can start us off by sharing a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. So hi, everybody. My name is Hayfa. I like to start my story with a little context at the beginning. So I grew up south side of Chicago. Both my parents are immigrant refugees. They came here during the Civil War in Lebanon in the 1970s. I'm one of 5 kids, first in my family to go to college. And I share that because there's a lot in my life journey and the career journey that I've had that is, we'll say, very atypical for somebody with my background. So post-graduation, I spent like the first chapter of my career in public service. So I did Teach for America. I lived abroad and had a Fulbright fellowship in Turkey. And then I spent some time in higher ed, public health, and sustainability. And in each of those areas, I recognized in myself that I have a very deep passion for impact, and the places that I was in the public sector just moved really slowly. And so that was my pivot point to be like, where can I go where I can solve really important problems quickly and at scale? And that was my shift into startups. So the majority of my career I've spent in high growth companies, from being the first employee all the way to Series E stages of growth. I've seen everything in between, right? Like the trials and tribulations of getting a business off the ground and the growing pains of a high scale business. And a couple years ago, I went off on my own and structuring my own consulting, working on things that I personally really love, one of which is strategic planning, coaching, startup advising, and just over a year ago started full-time as an investor in early stage startups. So I get to kind of blend these worlds of the things that I still really, really love to do. And now I get to capitalize on this maximizing impact where I don't just have to go into one company and solve a problem. I get to work with a portfolio of those. So there's this thread that kind of carries my narrative, but I'm very, very fortunate to be where I am today, but a very nonlinear path.
Well, thank you for sharing that. So annual planning isn't just setting lofty goals or throwing together a strategy. It's about creating a roadmap that actually drives growth, aligns your entire team, and keeps everyone focused on what truly matters. And you are incredible at this. And obviously, we've been fortunate to work with you here at Trainual, like I mentioned. What have you learned in your time with us? And I know you're going to say that we have a lot of visionaries and a lot of ideas and do a lot of things.
There is a lot of vision.
But obviously, you've seen us at our best and our worst, and you've kind of helped us to get to our best. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. So I started working, I've had the pleasure of knowing some folks at Trainual for many, many years, well before working with the team. So 2 years ago, I jumped in and started working with the team on their strategic planning. And when we first started working together, the question was why aren't we growing as quickly as we want to be moving? And, why are things flat? And things it feels like a struggle. And then we audited what their process looked like. And I love my Trainual people, but they had 5 objectives, 5 key results, a theme song per objective, and like wondered why they like, not an exaggeration, love the energy of like the songs, but they lacked focus, right? It's hard to move the needle on your business when you're trying to do a million things and nobody really knows what the big goal is and why we're doing what we're doing. They're attaching themselves to the song and not actually like the strategy. And the shift that has happened, I think would be like a monumental shift if you look at like where we were 2 years ago versus, we just left annual planning last week, is an extreme radical focus. They went from 5 objectives, 5 key results, a list of 100 projects and initiative, not an exaggeration, like in Asana, like tons and tons. And we're wondering why things weren't moving, to 1 objective, 3 to 5 key results, and extreme focus. And like that has been a huge shift. And like you can ask the team, right? Like they've seen a shift in their core business metrics, a shift in the team being really, really aligned and clear understanding of who owns what and why and how those things affect other teams. And that was so important in moving Trainual from where they were to where we are today.
And I love this quote that you have, and you said that real strategic planning isn't just about keeping the lights on, but truly driving growth.
Yeah.
How do you recommend that teams figure out which initiatives will actually move the needle versus ones that are just keeping the lights on? Because I think this is really interesting and something people should think about.
Yeah. Let me give a little context. So there's a bunch of different frameworks people can use for their planning. You could use EOS, you could use OKRs, you could use SMART goals. They're all essentially, to me, same, but a different name. And one thing that I always try to emphasize with the teams that I work with is there's a difference in your keep the lights on metrics versus what is your strategic shift in your business. Keep the lights on metrics are like your day-to-day. If these things don't happen, your business dies. Like you cannot function without these general metrics. So they look a little bit different for each business, but they might be like, we have a certain SLA for our response times for support. We have, certain quality criteria, it's different for each business. The way we think about strategy planning is it's different than your keep the lights on metrics unless one of your keep the lights on metrics is off and broken and dying. Then you can make that keep the lights on metric part of your strategic shift. So strategic planning should be something you're thinking about of how you move your business towards a different path than you currently are operating today. And those are important distinctions because it does not replace the keep the lights on metrics. Those are business as usual, and your strategy and whether it's your OKRs or your big rocks, whatever it is, that is the shift in your business that you should be putting energy and focus on. Now, the question you asked around like, how do we know what the right things are? I'm a believer in both a top-down, bottoms-up approach. So anytime I work with Trainual, before we come together as an executive team, each team leader is meeting with their respective departments. They're getting the perspective of the people who are on the front lines. They know the customer, they're interacting with the customer, they're seeing the ins and outs of the day-to-day. Now, not everything they vocalize will be the things you focus on, but you give a voice to both that perspective and you give a voice to what's happening at the top. And it is the responsibility of the leadership team to figure out what are the right things to pay attention to since you can't do everything. Now, when it comes to like which initiatives and projects, the initiatives and projects that you do as a business should either be keep the lights on or tied to your strategic goals. If you can't say yes to either of those, you're going off focus here. And so that's usually like the calibration test for me is like if somebody comes up with an idea or like we want to do X project, the question you all should be asking yourselves is, does this map to keep the lights on or does this map to our strategy? And if you can't say yes to either of those, it should not be done. It should be put aside in the parking lot, revisit later, not tied to moving the business forward. And that's the framework to operate from.
You talked a little bit about reeling us in, and I know you were mostly talking about Jonathan, but so many leaders deal with over-planning and under-delivering. It's one of the things I think I've always struggled with as somebody who likes to pride themselves on being a high performance, somebody who, executes. And I think finding those people who are going to rally behind you and execute is sometimes difficult. How do you think companies can strike the balance between big, lofty, ambitious goals and setting realistic expectations and actionable next steps that the executors can actually accomplish?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm a general believer that the most important thing is it starts with alignment at the executive level. And that maybe seems like off base here, but like if you can't get alignment and there's not trust amongst that team to push on each other to really challenge, is this realistic enough? Do we have what we need to like accomplish this? Do we have the right people? Do we have the right resourcing? If in that room when you're actually planning, you can't have those honest conversations, then you're going to feel it with the rest of the team. It will trickle down. It always starts with the executive team. And what happens on execution is the translation of what happens in that room on planning and the leader's ability to translate that to their respective departments. And, you know, we were chatting about this a little bit backstage is, you know, there is a difference between being a manager and being a leader. When you're on the executive team, you do both, but it is your responsibility to be able to have full alignment on that strategic direction you're going and have clear understanding of how your department plays into that goal so that when you go back to your teams, you could communicate that effectively and rally your people around it. You know, when we do our planning, it's not final when we leave that room. We have a very like certain things are final, like the objective and the key results, but all the projects, initiatives, features that are going to be built in the product, that's not finalized until after because the leaders then go back to their departments, bring them into the fold, get their perspective, work cross-functionally to say, here's what we can do, here's what we can't do, and get to a place of final commitment a month after we do planning. So the team is now going to get back together in mid-December or early December, a month after we did that planning to say, here's our recommendation. We went back to our departments. We engaged with our teams. These are the things we feel like we could commit to. These are going to be the highest ROI. And like it becomes a final deliberation amongst that team and then it's committed. So it's a multi-step process. It doesn't happen like overnight. It's not like top down, here, everybody go do what we say. The team genuinely engages the rest of the company. Now, it's also their responsibility to react to their teams. They need to know why we made these decisions. So when somebody pushes back, they have a response to say, hey, we consider this. This is how we thought about it. Here's why we landed here. And so it's really, really important that everybody's deeply engaged. They understand the goals. They know how it translates to their direct teams. They could communicate that and they can, you know, alleviate any concerns that their direct reports will have because they've already gone through that deliberation as a team.
Now, you talked about the importance of both top-down vision and bottom-up feedback. And if you've listened to any one of our episodes, you hear me say this all the time, that what we as leaders deem a benefit of our goals and the delivery of those goals or the result of those goals is never going to be what our team deems a benefit. Like we have to speak their language.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, how can we rally our teams around goals, especially when it comes to these big annual objectives that leaders are in a room kind of creating, and then employees are just kind of waiting for that message?
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to making sure that those leaders are engaging in conversations before we go into planning, so people feel like there is a voice there. You know, sometimes we do a formal process where we have every department run retrospectives with each of their departments so that they're representing those voices for those pieces. I genuinely think it starts there, and creating a culture where people can go to the leader and say, let me raise the flag. Here are the things that I'm thinking about. You know, I know you're going into planning. You know, one thing I want you to consider is X, Y, and Z. Now, again, it's a push and pull. Like a leader can't do everything. We can't say yes to everything. But what's important is that those leaders know how to respond when they go back and they can be proactive. Hey, you mentioned XYZ. We talked about it. Here's where we landed. This is why we chose not to do this. Like, please keep bringing your ideas forward. So that's one piece of it. The other piece is when you come to the final decisions and you're trying to rally your team, your company around these goals, you have to make it relevant to the individual. And is anybody here familiar with Daniel Pink? He's a behavioral psychologist. Raise a hand. If not, highly recommend looking up. He's got a really great TED Talk on what motivates people. And it's purpose, autonomy, and mastery. But the first pillar of it is purpose. We as individuals need to know the thing that we are working on ties to something bigger than ourselves, that we're not just a cog in the machine. Like, we need to know how my role, what I'm doing day to day, maps to that bigger company goal, that bigger company objective, and what role I can play in it. And it's the leader of that department's responsibility to bring that context and alignment for their respective department. If you don't do that, then you're missing the piece that, like, person comes into work every day and they're like, well, what the hell am I doing here? Like, what does it matter? Like, does it even connect to this bigger thing? Like, you want to be proactive and get in front of that. Like, you want to go to your team when you're doing the kickoff, and afterwards when you go to your departments and you're going to say, like, here's what we're doing. Hey, customer support, this is how this ties to you. Hey, engineering, this is how this ties to you. Your part does X, Y, Z, and this is how we move this goal. Hey, product, hey, people ops, you have to do it for every department. And if you're unclear as to, like, how it maps there, then, like, that should be a really serious conversation. Like, if the things that you're like, every person in the company, if you can't map that to keep the lights on or that strategic goal, you've, like, failed your rest of your company. So you gotta, like, it starts at the beginning, but it is like, you say it until you're blue in the damn face. Like, I tell the team, I'm like, if you can't go up to somebody in your company at any point and ask them what, like, the goals are, and they can't answer it, you have not said it enough. You have not pushed it enough. You have not opened every team meeting with it. Like, it sounds crazy, but people are people. They forget. They go off course. They get distracted. There's a new shiny object, new information, and and you have to bring them back to center. And that's both the executive team, department leaders, managers, all the way down to the front line.
Now, we pride ourselves here on being a high-performing team. And things obviously move really fast at Trainual. It's one of the things I love about Trainual and why I was one of those 7,000 applicants that you saw earlier. But we don't always stop to reflect before we jump into the next thing. It's like, okay, we're done, move on. And, we don't always stop to learn from it. Where do you think companies often miss out on that retrospect and gathering feedback? And what kind of impact can that have on where they go next?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of people have a hard time taking a moment to pause and look back and be like, okay, how'd that go? But I think it just takes practice to make it part of your company DNA. Like, anytime that, like, you don't want to retro every single thing you do that's become, like, over the top, but anything, like, big, you just kind of make it part. Like, you release a feature, you run a big conference and you say, oh, how did it, like, you run the retrospective to say, like, how did this go, and engage your team in that. You also, by, like, building that into your DNA, you empower your people to say, hey, I think we should run a retro on this because there's things that, like, I think we could have done differently, and I want to be able to have an open conversation so we don't find ourselves in Groundhog Day making the same mistake over and over and over again. Yeah, like, it is a very common thing, right? Like, we've all been there. Like, well, shit, like, seen this film before. Like, cool. Like, I don't want to be having the same conversation. And so you got to create a safe enough space for people to, like, raise their hand and say, hey, like, can we talk about XYZ? Or I didn't like how ABC happened. Can we run a retro or have a discussion? Like, I want to learn from this and make it better. Now, to me, you have to take it from the lens of this doesn't slow you down. It's a moment of slow to speed you up. The faster you can learn and iterate on those things, the better. And so I actually think, like, good companies and good culture move even faster when they create the space, because they're not finding themselves in the endless loop of doing the same damn thing over and over again and wondering, like, God, how did we get here again? Like, they're actioning it, and that enables that speed.
One of my most memorable things when I first onboarded at Trainual was this exercise that Jonathan did. It was called Start, Stop, Continue. And I think it was so simple, but it just really stuck with me, and I love doing it with the team every year. Are there any little frameworks or tips like that people can jot down to just kind of know what they should continue doing, what they should stop doing, or what they need to start doing?
Yeah, one, I think that's a beautiful, simple framework. If folks haven't heard of it or used it before, I highly encourage, like, that's one. If you're not familiar with a retrospective, it's a very similar framework. So generally in a retrospective, it is like, what went well, what didn't go well, and what do we need to do differently next time? Or what do we need to do going forward? And that can encompass the things that went well, as well as the changes you need to make, and have that documented, like an artifact, like have that in a place somewhere, knowing if you're going to do something similar again, you can always reference back to that. And so the retro framework of what went well, what didn't go well, and where do we go from here? Start, stop, continue. I think there's always like even like quick check-ins of like with your team on pulse checks. Like I don't know if people have heard the like rose, bud, thorn model. It's like rose is like things that are going really well. Thorn is like not going so well, and bud is like something that you're excited about that like you're looking forward to, and that kind of keeps a little bit of that essence, but is a faster one to do like as a check-in when you're starting your team meeting.
I love that. And as an investor, you've worked with a lot of different companies, and given the wide array of industries and folks that are here today, what's your best advice for making annual planning effective?
Yeah. Best advice is start. A lot of companies don't actually plan, don't set goals, or they do it very like haphazardly, and then they like wonder why things aren't working or not moving the direction, or their team is not aligned. So just start. Pick a framework that aligns with you. Like I said, it's kind of all the same with a different name, like whatever one resonates with you the most. I personally love OKRs just because they're simple. OKRs stand for objectives and key result. Objective is that bigger, lofty goal. Your key results are your measurables, and then all your projects, initiatives, and some like et cetera are under each key result. And each key result has an owner. And like I think picking a framework and then knowing that you're not going to get it right the first time, but you have to get momentum. You have to start and iterate every quarter, run a retro. How did we do? What went well? What didn't go well? Okay, like the next quarter, you're better. I generally say when you're starting out, don't try to do full annual. Start with quarterly. You may have like higher level annual projections, but start with like quarterly goals. It just helps keep focus and then gets you faster iterations on how to improve. There's a book that's called Radical Focus. It's a short book that's written like a fable. It's around the OKR framework, but it's one of my favorite books that helps like put it in context. I think it's easier to understand like strategy and strategic planning within like a story, and they tell OKRs through that lens. And so pick a framework that aligns with you, try to learn as much, and then do it on a more frequent cadence as you're getting off the ground, because that'll help you iterate faster and get really good at it. Like going from where we were 2 years ago with Trainual, it didn't happen overnight. Like we did one planning and like everything was like perfect and peachy. No, like I've been working with Trainual twice a year for 2 years, and like also engage with them on like some quarterly check-in stuff. And it is an iterative process. But like even last week, we were running planning, and after the first day, the team was like, shit, like we are like, it's like spaghetti, like shit's just everywhere. Like, how are we going to get through this with like clear focus? But we've done this enough times. And I was joking in the background. I was like, sometimes people will try to hijack and like, oh, maybe we should try it this way. And it's like, nope. Trust the process. Like we've been doing this and this process works. You just have to like, let me run this and we'll end up in a good spot. And like from last week, day one to like shit's messy. How the hell are we going to end here? To like on day two, like we had objectives and key results like lined up and the team was really, really aligned. It was because the team has had lots and lots of practice getting to this point to move that quickly. If we were just starting out 2 years ago, that would have been a little bit messier. We probably would have been at day 3 being like, fuck, like, are we going to get there? And like final minutes, we're like, all right, we got this finalized. But, it takes time. So like be patient, do something, start somewhere and pick a system that you think that you personally like, because you as the leaders in this room, you're going to be having to like carry the momentum and rally your team around it. So you have to believe in the methodology that you're rolling out. And if you're a CEO or executive, your whole executive team needs to be bought into that framework. Because I have some good stories around not being there, not with Trainual, with other teams that I've worked with.
It's like, ooh, juicy.
Yeah, no, not Trainual, thankfully. Although I will say, and I give Jonathan shit for this, is he was very skeptical of OKRs when we first started. Like I did a listening tour with the whole team before coming to meet in person. And he's like, I don't know how this is going to work. Like we've already been doing OKRs. I was like, no, you haven't. Like that's cute, but you haven't. Like I don't think 5 objectives, 5 key results, theme song, like that's not strategic planning. So, and he's on board now. But it took, we got it like after that first session, we got him there. But it's important. That team needs to believe in the process.
Well, speaking of that story again and not getting it right the first time, you also shared that, people just aren't going to get it right the first time.
Yeah.
Any pitfalls that we can avoid?
Don't try to do too much. Like I will say this time and time again, Start with one objective, three key results max. That's your starting point. If you're doing more than that, you're setting yourself up for failure. Like the people that do it poorly or like be like, oh, this doesn't work, is they try to do too much and they lack focus, they lack momentum. It's really demoralizing for the team. I mean, when I came in like 2 years ago, if like folks at Trainual, like people were down. They're like, it's hard to not have wins. Like people need that as like a motivator. They want to feel like the work that they're doing is moving towards something. And when that thing is just feels like a moving target and you can't reach it, it feels really horrible. And so you're less likely to have that if you can stay relentlessly focused on the thing that you're doing and stick to it. And if for some reason in that quarter you get new information that challenges what you set out to have as your goals, create the culture where you can challenge it and revisit it. And if you have to change it, you're changing it because there's specific information and you communicate that to your team. But focus. That is like the key. But it sounds simple, but it's really freaking hard because people want to do, you all are entrepreneurs, you're the leader, you want to do a lot of things. You just can't.
I love it. Well, this is really insightful, and thank you so much for joining us today, Hayfa. Tell folks where they can follow you along on your journey.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm like, do we have screens? Yeah. I am not a fancy like X person or whatever. You can find me on LinkedIn. I don't think there's a lot of Hayfa Aboukairs out there, so find me there. You can email me. And my website, I just have the company, the firm that I work at, Range Ventures out of Colorado. So
awesome.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, as always, document your processes and be a good human. Until next time, that's all for us today.
Yeah, thank you.